Hello there, everyone, and welcome to yet another live stream of the Game for Thought live stream series right here at HOEST Campus for Digital Arts and Entertainment in Kortrijk, Belgium. In traditional digital arts and entertainment fashion, we are streaming right here on Twitch. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon. No matter where you are very welcome here at this Game for Thought live stream. My name is Ali Weiss, and I am our ethics coordinator in international game development here at HOEST DIE. That's what we commonly call Digital Arts and Entertainment, DIE. And I'm super thrilled yet again to bring you another insightful and engaging conversation surrounding a different ethical topic in the games and digital entertainment industry. If this is your first time watching Game for Thought, welcome. We are so happy to have you here. If this is not your first time, if this is not your first rodeo, and you've watched quite a few of these, welcome back. I'm super excited to have another super engaging discussion with industry professionals this month about an extremely relevant topic and one that I hold near and dear to my heart: mental health in the digital entertainment industry. So if you're new to Game for Thought, as I mentioned before, every month we tackle a different ethically relevant topic in the industry. Last month we covered the topic of how much violence is too much violence in games. This month it's all about mental health. We will start right off with a panel discussion, and we'll start with some pre-submitted questions that were submitted from our audience, from our students, from the network that we have here at DIE. We'll start with those questions, and then towards the end of the stream, we're going to open it up for an audience Q&A. What's important for you to know, all of you watching out there, is that you are super welcome to ask a question at any moment during the stream. Just make sure that you put it in the chat and you put a Q beforehand so we know that it is a question intended for our panelists this evening. And speaking of our panelists this evening, I am honored to introduce the following as our panelists for this Game for Thought stream. Firstly, we have Keisha Howard joining us from Chicago. Keisha is the founder of Sugar Gamers, which is based in the US. We are also joined from people from 3 different countries tonight. So again, another very international panel. We also have Jean-Gobert de Coster, and Jean is based in Wallonia, which is the French-speaking region of Belgium. He's the chief executive officer at Funtomata, which is a game studio here in Belgium. And all of these guests will explain more about themselves in just a bit. And last but not least, joining us from Canada, we have Rachel Kowert. Rachel is the research director at Take This, and she's also the founder at Psychgeist. And so with that, I'm really excited to introduce our panel members. Again, any questions, put them in the chat. We'll get to them as soon as we can. And with that, hold tight. We're going to pull the panel members in, and we'll get back with you very shortly. If not, all right, everyone. As promised, we are back with our three lovely panelists for this evening. Rachel joining us from Canada, Jean-Gobert joining us from Belgium, and Keisha joining us from the United States. It is great to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining. And again, all of you out there on Twitch or watching on YouTube later, thanks for joining and giving attention to the topic of mental health in games and digital entertainment. Before we jump into the questions, I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves. So, for whoever wants to start, go right ahead. A quick, like, elevator speech, 1 minute introduction of who you are and also why you're on this stream.
No one dares to
I'll
start.
close my eyes and pick Jean.
Okay, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jean-Gobert de Coster. I created Funtomata, a gaming studio. We develop games specifically for children in the age range of 6 to 10 with lots of storytelling and added value also to help them learn about themselves, learn about life, and just become a better adult, hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jean. It's a pleasure to have you on this stream from the other side of Belgium. We were just talking about. Actually, it's not that far away, but for us, it is. Awesome. Thanks for coming, John. Rachel, hello. It's great to see you.
Hello, great to see you too. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Rachel Kowert. I am the research director of Take This, which is the oldest mental health nonprofit that serves game players and also game makers. And we advocate to destigmatize mental health challenges and provide mental health information and support. And I am also the host of my own YouTube channel called Psychgeist, where I talk about the science of games. So if you want to learn more about the mix of psychology and games, that's the channel for you.
Incredible. Awesome. Just saying, I completely support all plugging on this stream. If you want to support your organizations, your YouTubes, your game studios, please go ahead and do that. Yeah, this is the platform to do so. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's a pleasure to have you. And Keisha, last but not least, hello there.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Keisha Howard, founder of Sugar Gamers and a new initiative called Sugar Gamers Labs. So we've been around since 2009. We're a tech advocacy organization, always in community, always focusing on inclusivity and basically making a space for gamers to also be better people. So super exciting. That takes a lot of different directions. We have just finished our third game, so we have Axon Punk, Project Violation, and Game Gigs is probably the one that I'm most excited about that goes through 56 different types of jobs that you can have in the gaming industry. So we can like expand our idea of what it means to be game developers and what it means to be in this space. So that among the other things, I'm a gamer, love it, but I don't really like content creating. Isn't that crazy? Anyways.
Isn't it wild? Yeah, I posting on social media, that is like the bane of my existence. If I could just like be a robot to do that would be amazing. But anyway, welcome to the stream. Thanks so much for joining. We're gonna jump right in. So today's topic is a bit of a broad one. So mental health in the digital entertainment industry. I want to tackle this from a few different lenses. So from the lens of balancing the entertainment value of games and also including elements of supporting mental health. I want to tackle it additionally from the lens of the player as well, because there are just a billion gamers out there, and at the end of the day, mental health comes first. And so I really want to discuss for the player, for the communities that we are making our games for, what is it that is important for them to take away from this stream? And then I also want to take it from the lens of the developer, the people in the organizations and the studios that are responsible for content creation, essentially, and what their roles and responsibilities are. The first question that I see in the list of pre-submitted questions, thank you all for submitting your questions beforehand as well. The first question goes, in what ways can game developers incorporate themes of mental health into their games without compromising the entertainment value? So a lot of times when we're talking about including these elements into our games, people say, but I still want my game to be fun. I don't want anything to be necessarily taken away from the game, or I don't want the player to get bored. What are your takes on balancing entertainment value with also inclusion of mental health themes? Whoever would like to take that one, I give it all to you. I give the mic to you.
Okay.
I'll take it. I think that that's a question that needs some unpacking here, right? Because when we're talking about mental health, that means something different to everyone, as far as I understand it. So to try to make sure that that same audience who's being identified as like someone that can benefit from a game from a mental health standpoint, and then someone that's also going to be entertained, that's a lot to put on a game developer. And so, and like, I think that at the end of the day, just the player needs to sort of, be involved in that process of what they're playing and how they want to be impacted by that in some ways. So I don't know. I just think that it's a lot to put on a game developers who are usually not from medical backgrounds to be responsible for acknowledging or having games that have mental health components in entertainment. That's just a really big ask, and it will take us all to like kind of reach a point where we can find that nice middle ground. But I think that it's unrealistic for that. It's broad right now, so it's like, what
Right.
kind of mental health? How do you make that entertaining? Is that the right medium to do this in all the time? And I don't know. I think it's a huge ask, and it's a lot to unpack there, and it's a lot to put on a game developer to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Keisha. I really
Add
appreciate
something.
the transparency there as well, because a lot of these, it is a big ask for developers. Rachel, go right ahead, and then I think Jean wanted to add something as well. So,
Wow.
but Rachel,
John's
go right
created
ahead.
a game that does that, so for sure. I just want to piggyback real quick that Keisha's exactly right. If you want to create a game with mental health elements, you should be consulting mental health professionals. You should not be the expert on mental health challenges as a game developer, not necessarily. Maybe there's a few where that intersection lies. But it also depends on what you're making. So is it like Depression Quest, which was, clearly made to educate and provide insight into what depression is like, or are you talking like Stardew Valley or like Psychonauts 2, which was a game created to be a entertainment experience that had mental health interwoven in it. So it also depends on what it is you're trying to create. But with that, I will pass it to Jean.
Yeah, so I think the question mentioned something really important, which is, how do we do this without sacrificing the entertainment value? And I recently discussed with a researcher who does research on educative games and their how impactful they are in doing in educating. And one of the big takeaways was that when a game tries to be specifically educative and adds a layer of fun on top of it, it doesn't work because the people actually learn the process by heart. But they like, if you want to teach math, for example, you tell them to pick up apples. And oh, they're going to learn to count. No, they're just going to learn to pick up apples. They're going to learn the mechanics of the game. And if that game is not fun, then there is no stimulation. And a game does not what fun is. It does not necessarily mean that it has to bring you some joy. It needs to actually create emotions, whatever the emotions are. A game that scares you is a game that is actually going to contribute to to trigger some things in your brain, and you're going to learn from that. So and in a game that angers you as well. And so if you want to develop a game as a developer and you want to articulate it around a theme, you better first create a game and then articulate the theme around the game, because it's all about mechanics. And if you create fun mechanics, when we create games, we do iterative process. We start with a prototype. It doesn't look like much, but we see, hey, is this fun or is this not? And then we add layers upon layers on that. And I think the theme that you want to develop around that fun fundamental uh, base is the best way to approach that kind of a question.
So you think, Jean, that the danger there is when developers are kind of slapping the fun element um, on the end of of the game?
Yes, I think fun should be intrinsic and not extrinsic. So it's not something the fun comes from the experience, and it's not something you slap onto it. It doesn't work that
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah. So a few things that I'm hearing there. Also the importance of consulting mental health professionals. I think that's something that's very important when we're talking about asking developers to include these topics. And maybe for those of you out there, maybe if you're students or developers yourselves, or like in the indie space, for example, maybe this is a big ask for you, and maybe you don't necessarily see the relevance for you at the moment, which is okay. But it's great that, Keisha, you mentioned that it is a big ask originally, and then Rachel, that you add that, yes, speaking, involving professionals in that discussion, in that iterative process, is really important. I want to jump to the next question as well. This was received from a student from DIE, and it tackles the topic of representation of mental health conditions within the game itself. So here we're talking about the content that we're seeing within the game. Have you seen any games that really represent mental health in a way that's inspiring or engaging? What role does the representation of mental health in games play in increasing understanding?
I have to just say Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. Hellblade was created by Ninja Theory several years ago. It won BAFTAs. They famously consulted extensively with a group of psychiatrists in order to present a nuanced and accurate portrayal of schizophrenia. The main character, Senua, has auditory and visual hallucinations, and it's representative of what it's like to have schizophrenia. And I always bring that up as an example because, one, that is where the game was created first. It wasn't like developed to be a game about schizophrenia, but they wanted that to have as an element in it. And so they did it by extensively consulting people who understand it. And they built it into the mechanisms, and they built it into the narrative, and they built it into the game. That is like gold standard, but there's a lot of games that have really good, accurate, nuanced, beautiful portrayals of mental health. Like Stardew Valley is one I like to talk about a lot. or Celeste or Gris or Psychonauts 2. It's becoming ever more prevalent, I would say, in both the indie and the AAA space to have characters that represent different elements. And how does it affect us? We are influenced by our media. It changes the way we see and perceive the world, just like the books we read or the movies we see. Games are no different. So, for instance, with Hellblade on their Steam page, they have a little testimonial video from family members who have other family members who have schizophrenia, and they're just saying like, I feel like I know what it's like now. I feel like I have a much better sense of what they're going through because I've viscerally experienced it through this game. So it can be really powerful.
Rachel, you mentioned that for Hellblade, for example, it wasn't necessarily the intention to make it a game about mental health or about schizophrenia for that matter. Do you think that it's an added value for the game not to be solely focused on representing mental health, but having this as an element?
I mean, yes, I think at the end of the day, it does kind of seem like it is solely focused on it because she's the main character. But yeah, I mean, it's my understanding they didn't like set out to be like, I'm going to make a schizophrenia game. And I do
Right.
think it is a value because it's about, I'm making a game, I'm making an experience for somebody to have. What are the elements of that experience? It's like what Jean was saying, like, what are the elements of a good game? And then how can we weave in these themes we want to have into those elements that we already exist?
Right. So at the end of the day, the game, the
Yeah.
game mechanics, the game itself does still come first.
Certainly.
But with, of course, this very important element as well. Keisha, Jean, anything to add there about the importance of representation? Yeah, go right ahead.
I like the Gris reference because the first game I thought about was Gris. Now Gris is like we said, mental health is a very broad topic. So Gris is about grief and about depression and also there are some unknowns what Gris is about, which is also interesting. I'm also thinking about games like Stanley Parable, for example. I don't know if there was an actual intention, and I don't know if it's an accurate representation of something like schizophrenia, but there's definitely that little voice in your head, and you choose to follow it or not to follow it, and it brings you into a different state of reality. Um, I think that when you tell stories, inevitably, if you want to tell a good story, you're going to at some point tackle, a problem, a you create rich characters, and rich characters have rich issues. And I think if that's what I like about telling stories. That's why we make story games, because they carry naturally those messages. And that's why for Asphalia, the game we made, which is a story about a child whose anger is so strong that suddenly a phenomenon happens and the child wakes up in their own anger, and goes into and meets lots of different characters that embody different inner conflicts that exist. And so when you look closer to at the different characters, you find themes like toxicity, like fleeing the problems, like obsession, like not listening or trying to be heard, and frustration. It just naturally comes into the games, and there's so many games out there today. There's thousands that come out every week. It's unbelievable. And there is a game about something for everyone. There's a game about every subject. And it just happens naturally, I think. And we just have to have faith in our creators, that what we do, if we put our heart and soul into telling a story, it's gonna be significant for some people, not everyone, but some people, and that's what I like to do, anyways.
I love what you just said. Rich characters also create rich stories, and they're complex. So, I mean, if you make a complex character, the chances of you having, yeah, these complex kind of psychological situations also involved, yeah, it's very likely. So, I appreciate you saying that as well. Keisha, anything to add there?
I mean, you all You both said everything that I could say, but just the representation always, in my opinion, is just going to allow for us to have deeper empathy for people that might be different from ourselves. So when we're in games and we connect with a character, we connect with a story, we love that character, we are bonded to this narrative. It does simulate an experience where you can be a lot more empathetic, and a lot more cognizant of what people might go through. So having these representations and these stories in meaningful ways is so important, especially now as more and more people are articulating their identities and the different, very special, specialized sort of approaches to like how everybody wants to be understood. So like as much as we can just create these complex characters, create these stories, and be more cognizant about like the positive impacts of creating a space for empathy. I think it's just like super important.
Yeah. Thank you so much, all of you. Keisha, you mentioned that yeah, in this time, a lot of people are articulating their identities, articulating how it is that they want to be understood. And the world of games and digital entertainment is more diverse than ever, I think. And with that, these online social spaces are including people from all over. These online gaming social spaces, people with all different identities from all over the world are included in that space. And with that being said, we were just talking about earlier, like fostering a positive, safe environment through which to engage in something that you're passionate about. For example, gaming, or just role playing, even with role playing games online. And with such a diverse group of people online on the internet, how do we keep into considerations fostering a positive and supportive community for players' mental well-being? Keisha, I know you just touched on this when we were chatting before, so go right ahead about positivity, how to kind of counteract toxicity within gaming spaces online.
I think first and foremost, we collectively need to understand or redefine what safety is for ourselves. When we think of a safe space, like who are we giving sort of the range to secure that safe space, and why is it a safe space for an individual specifically? When it comes to gaming, it's one of the most diverse, I guess, consumer demographics that there is, so everyone's here, and that's going to mean that to be positive, you want to be inclusive, but to be inclusive means that you might be faced with having to deal with a personality different from yourself, which doesn't always feel safe. And like, what does that mean? How do we grow within that, right? Like we've been talking about safe spaces pretty hardcore for a number of years, and having designed safe spaces myself, having sought out safe spaces, having been in them, there are I feel like we collectively need to have more realistic expectations about what we're hoping to receive from these spaces. Uh, but in that, be empowered to contribute what we believe is positive, what we believe is inclusive from an individual level, as well as we're holding these organizations and companies and game developers accountable for facilitating safe spaces too. So it's like, I don't know, I feel like the responsibility sometimes just gets put in one direction. And so then, now that this is labeled this, we're no longer responsible from an individual standpoint to like recalibrate and redefine what is safe for us, right? You go into a game like Call of Duty, and that's a different kind of space than what another type of game, Animal Crossing might be. So, and does that mean that one game is worse than the other for people to like feel good about being in that particular space in a positive way. And again, it's just I think that the conversations that we need to have with ourselves and just in our public discourse needs to unpack a few things about responsibility in that realm.
Thank you so much, Keisha. Rachel, anything to add there from your perspective, focusing on psychology, group psychology as well, within these online social spaces and creating non-toxic environments for players?
Yeah, I mean, I think Keisha is absolutely right. It comes from both ways, top down, right? We have reporting systems and industry responsibility, but also bottom up in terms of fostering the kind of spaces that we want to be in. Every community is going to be different, and what's considered toxic in one community is not considered toxic in another. What's acceptable in Call of Duty to the average player is completely different than what's acceptable to the average player who's playing Animal Crossing, right? For instance. So I think in terms of like actually sending out a little tangible tip into the world, I think the best kind of advice I can give players, like from the bottom up, it's about curating the space you want to be in. And if you see something you don't like, it's like classic bystander training. Like, see something, say something. Like, you see something you don't like, be like, hey, that's not cool. We don't do that here. And that's how the culture gets shaped from the bottom up, because reporting tools are great and all. Everyone should have them, but that's like the lowest bar. That's like the basic tool. And that's not really shaping the culture. That's really after harm has happened, how can I seek help? And we want to kind of shift the discussion now to how can we create resilient communities and prevent the harm from happening in the first place. And it's about creating the community that you want, which will differ based on what group you're in.
Mm-hmm. It also kind of
I was just gonna say, Rachel, I love what you just said about culture because that's such a huge thing, and it's a nebulous definition for culture, right? But it's all important to us all. It's just like authenticity. But when we're creating a safe space, like culture is a huge part of it. But what does that mean? And who's defining the culture? And that's, I don't know. I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah. Thank
you. We love supportive panelists supporting each other. We love that. But it also kind of perfectly piggybacked what Keisha just said about taking accountability and responsibility on the individual side as well as the developer side. If you are engaging in something that doesn't feel normal or safe for you, or like it's making you feel good, then it's important to say something or verbalize that, or then remove yourself from that space. So thank you so very much. Jean, I'm curious to hear about your insights here, because Asphalia Anger, the game that you worked on, which shows the journey of emotional regulation through the eyes of a child working through her anger. I'm curious about your perspectives here as somebody working on children's games about toxic environments and the opposite, the positive online spaces.
Yeah, so it's indeed. I'm briefly going to talk about culture, because having been an exchange student, I went to Canada for a year, and it's really important. People don't really realize how different two cultures that seemingly are very similar um, can be. And we're all like a kind of a bowl of soup with lots of different ingredients. And a culture is actually a mix of different paradigms that have shaped a person throughout their lives. And the way you see things, you might think that everybody thinks that way, and then you realize absolutely not. And that is something that in when I see when I'm on Reddit a lot, and it often occurs to me that people are talking together, and that's where I'm getting to the community thing. So people are talking together, and they think they kind of they are speaking a general truth that everyone agrees with, and they don't realize that it's not the case, and that creates lots of frustrations and lots of of um, violence sometimes in the interactions. Now, when I think of how game developers can help create safe communities. I think it's also a question of company culture. Um, when I see, for example, the Hades community. So Hades is a game that actually is very inclusive. It includes lots of different types of romances, etc. But the game developers have that a culture, a positive culture that every one of their fans know and understand, and that's how kind of that community is actually a very positive community, generally speaking, you know. And when you go to some other communities where it's more, because Hades is a difficult game, right? So it's a game where, you know, you need to get good, as they say, you know. And in many games that are difficult, there is this kind of, you know, the players kind of put themselves as kind of an elite, you know, and I could get to the end of that boss, you know, I'm better than you, and you should get better, you know. When people say, hey, I'm not getting past this guy, and somehow, you know, Supergiant, they managed to create a game where that is very difficult, but where the people are not toxic about the difficulty of the game, and that's really precious. I think it comes from the company culture as in general. So as a company, what I try to do is to develop that kind of culture, and hopefully people who are going to be hopefully fan of what we do are also going to be fan of what we stand for. So now, on the topic of communities for children, we don't make like we don't have multiplayer in Asphalia, but so, and children, they if they talk about the game, they're not going to be like in online communities. Those are like, they're going to be in the schoolyards. They're going to talk with their parents, or they're going to talk, you know. So that's something that completely that is kind of out of our reach. So the only thing we can do is that our story carries the values that we want our players to share. Is essentially what the idea is, right? But of course, like, developers also have the right to tell stories about difficult topics, and that does not mean that they condone those things as well. So it's really difficult, because, yeah, from my perspective, it's easy because we make games that are pretty wholesome. So it's easy to say, hey, we have a safe thing, you know. But I don't know, I don't really know how you can make like a wholesome community around a game that is completely opposite of that. It is a really tough question, but it comes down to company culture, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's such a great point about company culture. And it's also foreshadowing an entire slew of questions that I have coming up, also about mental health through the lens of the developer and crunch culture and sustainable working practices and things like that. And I'm thinking now, somebody at some point mentioned like smaller indie studios, I think, or it just popped up in my brain as we were discussing. But I'm thinking about the approach that smaller studios, for example, indie studios, have with regards to mental health for their developers, and also creating, John, you just said like a wholesome community, using the word wholesome. How might that process look different for an indie studio versus a large AAA studio? The focus on mental health. I know that's a very broad question. It could be approached in many different directions. So either the representation in the game, the commitment to mental health support within the community. How might those things look different in an indie studio with a few employees versus a larger AAA studio?
If,
I,
oh, I'm sorry. You were
oh,
sorry.
sorry. I thought I thought it
You
was.
can play rock, paper, scissors to see who goes first. Jean, go right ahead, and then I'll jump on over to Keisha.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to what the company was built on, what the values, what the original values were in the company. And of course, when you're an indie studio, it's easy to carry those values. You don't have any shareholders that tell you how to talk, what to do, your objectives, etc. But I think that is the biggest challenge when growing, is to stay true to your values. And so if you're an indie studio and you want to stay true to your values, I think it is important that one of the first things you do when you start your studio is not make a game, is to decide what your values are. And it's something that you just don't decide over lunch. It took me about 3 months to kind of identify what my core value was, and it's to share. But it's not just an idea. It's actually something that I think about every day. How do I live by that value? How can I measure that value through the spectrum of what we do? And what I'm doing here is part of that. So identify your core values and grow your company around that value. Whatever it is you make now, and maybe tomorrow you're going to do something else. But if you stay true to those values, then you're going to go in the right direction.
Yeah, I really like what you said, John, about when you're making a studio. We have a lot of students out there who are, one of our majors is independent game production, for example. Hi students out there. And this is good information for them to know. When you're making a studio, don't jump right into your game, but think and take some time to think about who you are as a studio and what your core values are. I think that goes beyond games. That goes into many different domains and spaces. But Keisha, go right ahead. I pass the invisible microphone to you.
I'm sorry. I love Jean's response because it's so positive and wholesome. But having worked in video games these last 14 years, I look at video games as like art, right? And if you're an artist, you can choose to create art for yourself and art from your heart and just art because it's beautiful and because you feel the that this medium calls to you. And I feel like video games are a medium for different types of artists, writers, designers, whatever. And when we're thinking about studios, we have to consider profitability. And when we have to insert profitability into the success metric of a game, it kind of changes the conversation pretty, drastically, in my opinion. So, like, yeah, of course, you can create amazing titles, indie or AAA, if you have that culture. But like, what dictates how these things kind of come about is if the game is usually profitable. And that's, it kind of like, puts a little a sobering tinge to it, right? Because we want games, a lot of us have an attachment and a relationship with them from like childhood, from bonding with someone who bought us these games. Like, we have such an innocent, wholesome attachment to games, and then we become adults and they become, a different, they change, they shift. It's sobering. And so I sort of expect to be able to have that balance of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be positive and I'm gonna put my values first. Like, that changes when you got to pay your bills and you've put all your time and effort into learning a craft that's supposed to be a part of your career. And like, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to always be able to work on something or work within a setting that's going to be always in alignment with your culture, especially as you grow and you change as an individual. Anyways, I just wanted to put that out there because I think sometimes when we're talking about these conversations, we forget an element of it that kind of structures how we have to think about it, right? So I don't know, just my opinion.
It's a difficult, thank you very much. It's a difficult question to answer. But how do we then, if the profitability is such a big piece of this, of the puzzle, and again, this is actually in many different domains, not just games, but how do we find that balance? And if it's impossible to strike that balance, per se, how can we hold as firmly as possible to our core values as a studio, as an organization, while also trying to stay afloat? Are there any tangible, like any recommendations how to at least try to strike that balance? Because I know in a perfect world, it would be strikeable, but in reality, it's difficult.
I mean, I think well, for me, I think that it's definitely.
Oh, I think, is everyone frozen? Oh, okay, everyone's back. Okay, I think we were frozen for a second there. Yep, everyone's back. Can I hear everyone? I don't think so. Yes, okay, I heard noise.
Your sound card works perfectly.
That was perfect, John. Okay. Rachel, Keisha, could you just say something quickly so I just know that I can hear you all?
I want to hear what Rachel has to add to this.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. I can hear everyone. We're back. We're back. We're officially A-okay. Rachel, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the question was, how do we strike a balance, or how do indies and AAAs do it differently? I think there is a balance to be struck, and some are better than others, and it does come down to values and priorities. Obviously, the bottom line is the most important for big companies that have shareholders. But there's research to support that burnout and crunch diminish the bottom line. Having to rehire a new person and train them up is far more expensive than just taking care of the employees you already have, for instance. And we see some AAAs do it better than others, some indies do it better than others in terms of how they address mental health in their games and how they treat their employees. So I think that the balance can be found. It just has to be a priority. And the financial argument is there if you look for it.
I would just like to add about how you strike that balance, and I totally agree with Keisha. Money is really important. Uh, I and what I mean by, you really have to think about your values. You also have to have values that you can monetize. If your value is to be, I mean, what I mean is if your value is to be poor, then it's not going to work, right? So um, and but once you have decided that your values, you kind of have to own up to it, and do the hard work of figuring out how can we be profitable while still living by those values. And it is hard work, but in like it's always a question of trends, whether, well, not just trends, it's also a question of luck. But whether your game is going to be profitable really depends on analyzing the market. But you can also ask yourself, okay, how on that market, what are the market segments that I could fit into that would allow me to develop the values that I carry. But it's a lot of work, and you have to do it if you want to stay true to those values, is what I mean.
Thank you. So it was also mentioned within the last couple comments there. I think Rachel, you had mentioned it, burnout, and hiring, rehiring because colleagues are burning out, and it's actually more efficient, more effective, and also just in integrity. It's just a better use of resources and efforts to make sure that the company values are positive. They are not super pro crunch culture. And I know that as I said before, there's a lot of students out there who are soon about to enter the industry. Some of them are starting their internships, for example, in just a couple of short months. And so I want to ask about the responsibility of game developers within the realm or the conversation of burnout and crunch culture. Concretely, what are the roles and responsibilities there? And have you seen any studio or organization really efficiently prevent things like burnout or really support their employees in a positive way?
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint what the role of the studio is, except for the fact, like, be a good human and take care of your workforce and don't overwork your employees. Take This, for instance, is a really good place that fosters good mental health and well-being. We have the whole week off for Thanksgiving, for instance. If somebody is feeling burnt out and overworked, we find other people to come in and take their place. versus the idea of I have to do it, or your boss saying you have to do it. And I know that you've been working 40 hours this week, but you got to work 60 hours this week, and you got to make it happen, and you got to sleep here, and the release date is coming. And first of all, that produces bad games. Second of all, that's just bad practice. And as much as we like to pull on the heartstrings of the ethical argument, at the end of the day, students, you are your own best advocates. Not all studios are that way. Not all studios operate on crunch culture. Not all studios push you to burn out. And it's really difficult with games because it's your identity, as we've all mentioned. Your identity is so often tied up in being a gamer and loving games. Then you get the job in the game industry and you're just so happy to have a position in the game industry. And so you're like, I can work 60 hours. Is it really so bad? 100 other people want my job. I should be doing my job. Yeah. No, like you and your mental health is your priority, and you are your own best advocate. So if you find yourself at a studio in which they're asking things of you that are detrimentally impacting you, you need to start looking for a different studio, because that is not respectful of you and your abilities. And also that is a good way to just like burn out and never want to work in games again.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Keisha, Jean, also from personal experiences, welcome to share as well. Thoughts about positive work practices in terms of anti-crunch and taking care of the people that are working around you. If not, or people are frozen again. Are we frozen? That is very bizarre. If you can still hear me, we will be back quite shortly as soon as I can hear our lovely panelists once again.
Hello.
Oh, okay. I see people moving. I hear people. Amazing. Hello. We're back. Okay. So sometimes Discord decides to be a bit interesting. And it seems like today is one of those days. However, we're back. So no worries there. But I was asking if there's any more thoughts from Keisha or Jean from also your personal experiences regarding taking care of employees, taking care of the people around you, and despite pressure from other people moving away from the crunch culture.
It's Rachel hit it on the head, right? People who are going into gaming industry need to be their own advocate. Meaning, I've had people on my team who are neurodivergent, and for some types of people, like spending 20 hours doing something that they really like is something that they do. And they enjoy that. And I'm just like, okay, you shouldn't do everyone has to navigate their mental health the way that they do, and just making sure that there's space for people to work in the way that they are most comfortable working with. Like, hey, you've been doing a lot, it's interesting how everyone sort of moves through the game industry differently. But as Rachel was saying, understanding how you work to know when you're being exploited and abused, so you can make the proper decisions for yourself, is very important. And what's best for you might not be best for another person. And I think that sometimes we have this sort of blanket approach to how we're in this space, and it's difficult, right? So I've seen people who just joyfully work on the things that and they work, they want to do that, and they're in that zone, they're in that state of flow, it feels good to them, and that might not work for the next person. But so each individual kind of needs to know where they're at, how they want to work, so they can pinpoint if they're being abused or exploited. I mean, I don't know. Just basically the same thing Rachel said.
It's also what you say, Keisha, is also emphasizing on the importance of communication as well. Because I always say different strokes for different folks. Some people are able just innately to spend so much more time on things and to look at their screen for so much longer than, for example, I am able to do. And I know that my limits are my limits, and I try to respect that as much as possible, but also communicating when enough is enough. And what you do feel comfortable committing yourself to, and also understanding that different people have different limits, and we should respect our own limits and where those lie which is of course a journey. I work on this each and every single day. I also just want to remind everyone watching out there that it is time for the audience Q&A, and I think a couple of questions popping in. I also see Rachel. I see that you tried to put a couple of links in the chat. I think unfortunately Twitch doesn't allow for URLs to be put in the chat. However, you can send them to me, Rachel, and I can put them in the description of the YouTube video. So that's perfectly dandy. If anyone has any questions out there regarding mental health, regarding representation of mental health in games, crunch culture, the role as an individual or as a studio or as a future industry professional, go ahead, ask it in the chat. I see already a question in the chat. Hello there. The question reads, what is the best way to handle a pro crunch company? I'm not sure if that's from a student or somebody that's already in the industry, but in your opinion, if you are interviewed and you start with a job and you're discovering, okay, I'm being coerced into working a lot of hours and it's really not what I had envisioned. How would you handle that personally?
Well, it's a difficult choice to get to this point in your life because working in games is one of the most competitive industries that there are, let's face it, right? And so if you're going into a pro crunch studio, you have to like know within yourself whether you're going to like be in that culture. It's kind of a choice that again on an individual level people have to make, and then obviously if there's abuse and exploitation going on, call it out for what it is. But if a company is being transparent about their expectations and the people that are working there seem to want to work there, then it might not be the studio for you, and you might have to take a pass on that to take care of your mental health, which is a difficult thing because you also have to take care of your finances. But taking care of your mental health is more important than that. And finding that, I guess, balance, which is where it gets hard. So, but you have to be able to be like, no, I'm not going to take this. It starts with the individual advocating for themselves and saying, no, I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be here to be abused this way. And that's a hard thing to do. But it's the empowered approach to have.
I can imagine that that's difficult. It's for especially people who are just entering the industry. Maybe it's not apparent from the get-go if that's the norm. What's to be expected. So I'm sure that it's very difficult for people who are new in the industry as well. Jean, go right ahead. I see you wanted to add something.
Yeah, so I wanted to also react to the previous question. I know we're getting to the chat, so I'm not going to be too long about it. But there's several sources of crunch culture. There's the source that comes from the top, that the management says, hey, we got to get the deadlines, we got to crunch. But there's also the crunch that comes from the team itself, from the people. Like you said, some people are happy to work 20 hours a day on something they're passionate about. And I think it is actually the company's responsibility to prevent that and to say, no, it is time. It is 5:30. You've got to go home. You got to stop, not just for them, but also for the others, because it creates this state where one is overperforming, yes, because he's doing more hours. He's there at 6 a.m. and leaves at 7, and it is also it is a communal responsibility to prevent crunch culture from snowballing, because it happens by snowballing. I think we all want to start a company where we don't have crunch culture, and then it starts settling in, and you have to be vigilant about that. That's what I meant.
Thank you very much. Only for the sake of time, I move on to our next audience question. Thank you so much for submitting as well. Nintendo Guts. Ooh, interesting Interesting username there. Question, do you think companies should take responsibility for contributing to mental health stigma? For example, misrepresenting mental illnesses with untrue stereotypes. Should they owe it to consumers to get the right people on board to make sure that this doesn't happen? Rachel, yes, go right ahead.
It is their responsibility, yes. We know from the research that the way that mental illness is portrayed in the media impacts our behaviors and our thoughts towards mental illness in the world at large. There's been 100, 1,000 studies looking at this, and games are no exception. I think in terms of taking responsibility, a great example is Sigma from Overwatch he was, I think, where it was the new character and he had, his backstory was like 3 lines, and it was like, oh, he came from a mental hospital and he has no shoelaces in his shoes because, in a mental hospital, they take your shoelaces. And there was like a huge uproar from the mental health community being like, this is an awful thing to just like put out in the world. Like, these are stereotypes, and they're just reinforcing this idea that psychiatric treatment is an unsafe place, and that if you go there, they're going to take your shoelaces, and like all this backlash. And they did have to kind of come back on that because of the uproar that came from it. So yes, they are responsible, and they should know better, and they should be consulting people, and they should not be contributing to these gross overgeneralizations and stereotypes that we have about mental illness in society, which are harmful. They're harmful. So yes, they're responsible. Sorry, I was like really itching to answer that question.
Thank you. So Rachel, you're like, you're totally welcome to answer any of these questions. Yeah. And snaps for that. Moving on to the next question from Dr. Goose. I may have missed this earlier, but I'm curious about what mental health expertise was consulted in the making of the Funtomata game. So Asphalia Anger, leading over to Jean.
Yeah, so very early on, because I knew I wanted to do something about emotions, I wanted to have someone on board who was who knew what they were saying, because I didn't want to say things that was wrong, and I wanted to have a right approach on emotions. So I'm working with someone who is a coach in schools, and her name is Anne-Catherine Comans. And she goes in schools and works with children to help them identify and talk about their emotions. So I did not work specifically with a mental health expert, but just someone who is working with children, a field person, someone who's on the field and who works there. And of course, there's many ways to talk about emotions. There's many topics. There's been many different approaches. I just wanted to have an approach that was meaningful in the current meta of what it is that we talk about when we speak about emotions. I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I see another question from the chat. Jojo Zandstorm. Hello, Jojo. How do you, it says, how do you enroll a person or kind of reintroduce to the team a person, a colleague on a team that was burnt out? How do you reintegrate a colleague that suffered or experienced a burnout or kind of a dip in mental health? Or do they find a new studio as a standard is what the question reads. So all about reintegration there.
I just want to say, well, very slowly and at their own pace is the first bit. But there was a wonderful talk on burnout that was at the Game Developers Conference last year. It was, it featured several game devs, and it was moderated by Dr. B, who's the clinical director at Take This. It is openly available on the GDC website. I can't link it because Twitch won't let me, but I'll send you the link.
But I'll put it in YouTube. Don't you worry, viewers.
But one of the stories was about that, about leaving a workplace and being reintegrated into maybe 2 of the stories were even about being reintegrated. And they take different paths, and it's not linear, but it does require a mental health professional, and it does require a person going at their own pace. So they don't inherently have to go somewhere else. But I'm not the expert, but that panel was, so I'll find the link and I'll send it to you, Allie.
Awesome. I appreciate it very much. So thank you so much. All right. Any other questions from the chat? Please feel free to go ahead and enter those into the digital text box that you see on the internet. If not, any last comments, last words about the importance of discussing mental health in the games and digital entertainment space? What is it, if you can give any tangible pieces of information or feedback to those of you who are watching out there? Rachel, Jean, and Keisha, what kinds of words can you offer to our audience out there?
To the game devs, I would say consult with subject matter experts if you want to create a game that includes mental health elements. That would be my soundbite.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rachel, Keisha, Jean. While we wait for some questions to roll in, again, if any questions, go right ahead and enter them. Keisha, Jean, go right ahead. Thank you, Rachel.
I mean, just as a game developer, really sort of doing the work, whether that's going to therapy, whatever is going to keep you calibrated to knowing why you're in the video game space in the first place, because it is a challenging space to be in, and it will take some, self, I guess, moderation, knowing why you're here. So, and that helps to make the best decisions for your own mental health as you, move through and mature through this industry. So.
Thank you very much, Keisha. Jean, you're up next.
So, as they often say, mens sana in corpore sano. So, don't forget also your physical health, because it will help your mental health as well. And I mean, as gamers, we spend a lot of time sitting, and I don't do that enough. I should do it too. So, it's a note to myself, you know, take care of yourself as a whole, because you're not just a mind, you're a body. And it is also very important to be aware of both those things. So when you worked for the game industry, ask for a desk that goes up and down, be specific. You want a good chair, you don't want to sit on a stool. And that is actually going to contribute to good or bad mental health on the job, is if you have a good environment and a something that is healthy both for the mind and the soul. And also have fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have time just for one more question, actually. And this is one of the pre-submitted questions about the role of mentorship and peer support while working in the industry, or even being a student for that matter. So the question reads, what role can mentorship and peer support play in the mental well-being of game developers, and how can the industry encourage supportive relationships?
Keisha, this seems right in your alley.
It does. It does,
Yeah.
Keisha. Go.
I mean, it's imperative. Like being in this digital space is beautiful. Technology connects us. Oh my gosh! But like we need human connection throughout this whole process. It's part of how we, thrive and are healthy people. How we stay calibrated. How we stay supported. So being in community, finding people in video games, mentorship is so easy. You don't even have to tell somebody that they're your mentor. You could just find somebody that's doing work that you like and be their friend. Just tell them that they're great and you want to hang out, right? Like we have all these structures in place because we've been in these digital spaces so long that we've forgotten like community is a lot more organic and we need it. But yeah, that has been like the pinnacle of how I've developed any community, is making sure that people are going to be able to make friends, people are going to be able to get guidance, and so on and so forth. On the flip side of that, I do have to say there are such things as bad mentors and bad peer groups. That can be a thing. And that's something I'm a big age and I still have to like learn these things. And you can get advice and it might not be from a person whose values are in alignment with yours. So you have to be careful, again, checking in with yourself as you grow, But yeah, that community aspect, mentorship and peer groups, all that good stuff is part of how we grow. So
Yeah, I think what you say about genuine community relationships, that's really important because sometimes we hear like the word mentor or peer support and it sounds like this big ambiguous thing. But really, yeah, if you see somebody who is doing inspiring work, uh, reach out to that person and have a chat with them about what they're doing, what they're up to. And that could make just that perspective shift happen for you, I think.
yeah, and like I call it. I mean, I don't call it anything, but the phrase that I constantly hear is like giving people their flowers is a great way to like start your mentorship relationships. If you're thinking about it, like just acknowledging what people do. You don't have they don't have to give you anything, but just being in practice of that really helps communication in community. So just like having that ability to acknowledge what community that you want to be in and why. It's like, oh man, this is where all the artists are that work in Unreal Engine and I love their work. And just being able to say that is kind of part of it. And I think a lot of us are shy and don't know where to start. And just starting at a place of gratitude and a place of acknowledgement for other people's contributions is a really, really positive place to begin.
Absolutely. Any last final thoughts? Rachel, Keisha, Jean, anything that you just want to leave with a mic drop out to the audience?
That's all I have left is thank you for having us. It's really important to have these discussions, and it's really heartwarming that in game dev programs that we are having these discussions about protecting your own mental health, about crunch culture, about burnout, about mental health representation. It's just great to see because I feel like 5 years ago even we weren't having these conversations at all.
Absolutely. And on that note, thank you so much, Rachel, Jean, and Keisha, for joining us this evening for this really insightful conversation all about mental health in games, representation from the lens of the player and also from the lens of the developer. A big thank you in the chat for these incredible panelists joining us from Canada, the US, and Belgium. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for all of you out there on Twitch, hang tight. Just a couple minutes for more information about the upcoming Game for Thought streams. Hang in there, and lastly, thank you to the panelists. Give them some love in the chat, and I will be right back. All right, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us for yet another Game for Thought live stream. This was the second episode of our fourth season of Game for Thought. So thank you to all of those joining on Twitch and joining on YouTube in the future. I'd like to give, of course, a very special thanks to our panelists for this evening, Keisha, Jean-Gobert, and Rachel. A big thanks as well to our tech crew and our moderating crew this evening, Casper, Bradley, and Rico, and Kimberly, who was here before. A big thank you to all of you. This wouldn't be possible without you. So many thanks. make sure to tune in on December 13th for our last Game for Thought stream of 2023, where we will be tackling the topic of games for good beyond entertainment. So I cannot wait to see you again on the 13th of December via Twitch for another Game for Thought stream. Special thanks, of course, to Hoest Digital Arts and Entertainment, the Flemish Audiovisueel Fund, and also the Flemish Games Association for making all of this possible. Don't forget to check out, when this video makes its way to YouTube, don't forget to check out the links in the description. Also, what I will be putting in the link in the description is the link to our Game for Thought blog posts. Yes, we have blog posts now. So if you weren't able to catch any of the previous streams, if you are only for some reason tuning in to the end of the stream and you're hearing me right now, we have blog posts now that basically give a nice digestible recap of what we discussed during the streams. So go ahead, check those out. They are on the website of the Flemish Games Association. And with that, I have had a pleasure with you all, and I'm so honored to continue to have these conversations with you. Keep this topic, mental health, in mind as you continue about your days, whether you're studying, whether you're in the industry, and I hope that collectively we continue to bring these ethical topics to the table together. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It's been wonderful. See you next time on Game for Thought. Bye-bye, everyone.